Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the high-stakes modern space race to the moon and beyond. We're actually pulling from two fascinatingly different sources for this. On one hand, we've got the gritty, totally unfiltered public discourse from a massive Reddit forum. And on the other, the pristine, highly detailed engineering mathematics from an MIT research paper on mission architectures. We're going to bring both of these to life right here on the screen.
So here's the ultimate question dominating public forums today. Who's actually going to return humans to the moon first? NASA or China? It's a massive debate, and it touches on everything from national pride and engineering philosophy to straight-up economics. If you look at what people are saying online, commenters draw a pretty stark contrast between the two space agencies. On one side, NASA's often viewed by the public as being totally bogged down by bureaucratic red tape. People point out that their decentralized centers act almost like localized jobs programs just to secure congressional funding. Now, on the flip side, you have the CNSA. They're associated with what's called China speed, this perception of massive, defense-level prioritization to just get objectives done at will. There's this really powerful quote from the public debate that perfectly frames this armchair perspective. One user argued, China's leadership sees it as a defense program and is willing to throw wads of money at it. The US sees it as a, oh, by the way, pet project on the side. People in these forums basically argue that as long as China prioritizes space as a core defense initiative and the US treats it as a side project, China has a huge structural advantage. But of course, getting to the moon isn't just about throwing wads of cash at a rocket, right? It requires some truly staggering feats of engineering. Okay, Section 1, Lunar Travel Itineraries. Let's zoom in from that massive political macro level to the micro-level engineering data. MIT researchers have actually benchmarked our exact travel itinerary options. Think about it like planning a road trip. If you're going to the moon, you have to decide exactly where your spacecraft are going to meet up along the way. The MIT paper outlines 4 different ways to rendezvous. You have Earth orbit rendezvous, lunar orbit rendezvous, libration point rendezvous, which takes advantage of stable gravitational points in space, and finally, direct return. That literally just means leaving Earth and landing straight on the moon without stopping. Tracing the history of these designs is super interesting because it shows a massive shift in how we approach the cosmos. Look at this timeline here. Back in 1989, the plan heavily relied on assembling parts in Earth's orbit. Then, by 1996, the focus shifted to cheaper, simpler tech like open space cockpits. But jump to the present day, and we're seeing a complete paradigm shift. We are moving totally away from those Apollo-style, single-use isolated missions and moving toward continuous commercial partnerships and the brilliant use of in-space fuel depots. Basically, we're not just visiting anymore, we're building permanent infrastructure. And the sheer scale of these modern ambitions, it's staggering. MIT data tracking lander wet mass shows those blue bars getting dramatically taller on the right side of this chart. Modern landers proposed by companies like Lockheed Martin and ULA are getting so much heavier, and that weight directly correlates with that orange line you see, extended stays on the lunar surface. Simply put, if we want to stay up there longer, we have to bring a much bigger ship. Moving on to Section 2, the fuel mass trade-off. So supporting these gigantic modern landers really comes down to a single, critical engineering choice: fuel. It's a strict trade-off. On one hand, you have liquid hydrogen architectures. As the MIT study points out, they have a really high wet mass cost, meaning the fuel itself is incredibly heavy, but they provide massive payload capacity. On the other hand, you have non-hydrogen alternatives like liquid oxygen and methane. Those require very lightweight systems, which the source notes can actually increase technology development costs, decrease reliability, and ultimately increase the risk of the mission. But the MIT data clearly shows the payoff for choosing that heavier fuel. Check out the blue triangles at the top right of this chart. While hydrogen landers have a higher wet mass, they massively increase the mission's utility. And the researchers define utility as the number of crew members multiplied by the number of days they can spend on the lunar surface. So hydrogen basically allows more astronauts to spend way more days exploring. On top of that, if your goal is to bring heavy commercial payloads to the surface, hydrogen is hands down the superior choice. Assuming you have the exact same number of launches, the hydrogen architectures from ULA and Lockheed Martin allow you to bring vastly more equipment, science gear, and commercial goods to the lunar surface per astronaut. This payload capacity is a total game changer. It opens the door to an entirely new era. Because we can carry so much more mass, we aren't just limited to bare-bones survival gear anymore. This actually opens the door to deep commercial branding in space. It's perfectly embodied by this idea of a Louis Vuitton-designed lunar rover leaving stylish tracks in the lunar dust. I know it sounds literally like science fiction, but the engineering math tells us we now have the cargo space to make commercial luxury on the moon a reality.
All right, Section 3, Stepping Stones to Mars.
Ultimately, everything we are doing on the moon is just a test bed for the ultimate prize, Mars. But getting there? Exponentially harder. The MIT paper breaks a typical Mars mission down into a staggering 6-phase journey. The big takeaway here is step number 1, cargo pre-deployed. Because Mars is so unbelievably far away and the physics are so unforgiving, almost all successful architectures require sending your supplies, your return vehicle, and your fuel to Mars long before the human crew even leaves Earth. And the functionality of the Mars lander itself, it's split into these 4 incredibly stressful phases where the ship is directly responsible for crew survival. It has to keep them alive on the long outbound transit, survive the fiery descent through the Martian atmosphere, launch back off the surface during ascent, and keep them breathing on the entire inbound transit home. It's a lot to ask of one machine. Now here is a really fascinating twist. You would logically think that if you pre-deploy lots of cargo elements to Mars ahead of time, your crewed lander could be much, much lighter, right? Well, surprisingly, researchers found no clear relationship here. Adding more deployed elements to a campaign does not successfully guarantee a reduction in the crewed lander's wet mass. Just piling up more assets doesn't always translate to a lighter ship. Because of these immense weight constraints, we have to live off the land. In the industry, this is called in situ resource utilization, or ISRU. Virtually all successful Mars architectures, from NASA's design reference architectures to Robert Zubrin's famous Mars Direct plan, require astronauts to utilize local Martian resources to survive. This means they have to extract oxygen for life support, derive rocket propellants directly from the Martian atmosphere, and even produce things like acetate. You literally cannot pack enough supplies for a round trip. You have to manufacture them once you get to Mars.
Let's move to Section 4, Politics meets Rocket Science.
Zooming back out from the pristine math to the gritty realities of funding, the public forum highlights some immense frustration. Commenters frequently point out that NASA's engineering choices are hobbled by congressional mandates. For instance, being forced to use expensive legacy space shuttle parts to save money rather than just starting with a clean sheet design. The public sentiment argues that this decentralized approach, spreading funding across various political districts to keep Congress happy, creates a system that is naturally inefficient, and that leads to the inevitable over-budget and behind-schedule complaints we see in the news all the time. And honestly, the human toll of this bureaucracy is striking. It is shocking to read firsthand anecdotes in these forums from people claiming to be space agency staff. They describe dealing with failing facilities, having to put tarps over $1-million laser cutters because of roof leaks, and literally having brown water coming out of the faucets, all while simultaneously trying to build our future in space. It's a staggering disconnect between the pristine ambition of space travel and the crumbling infrastructure on the ground.
Conversely, while the forums note that China operates with immense speed and defense-level funding, they definitely have their own unique constraints. Commenters astutely point out that China faces extreme pressure to avoid a public relations disaster. They're currently in a high-risk period regarding their international soft power, meaning they absolutely cannot afford to rush safety and risk losing an astronaut. The political fallout would just be too great. So even China's speed has a strict speed limit, and it's dictated by public image.
So after looking at the raw engineering data from MIT and the unfiltered public sentiment of the people watching it unfold, I'll leave you with this final thought. Getting back to the moon and onward to Mars might just be a test of our political systems as much as our engineering prowess. Can a decentralized democracy with budget constraints out-engineer a centralized government with deep pockets but zero margin for a PR failure? I hope this explainer gave you a brand new lens to view the news through. Stay curious and keep looking up.